Warren Redlick, thank you so much for watching. Let's see if we're working. Hello, hello, hello. This is Warren Redlick. Thank you so much for watching. Here, and I wanted to talk about my buddy James Douma. James did a thread on X about Robotaxi, and I'm going to disagree with him on some details. I think overall we're in the same general ballpark of where we think things are going, but I think he's underselling Robotaxi, the potential for Robotaxi to really be a game changer. Good evening, Mark. Good evening, not your mom. Um, so, and if you follow James Down, you know he's brilliant. I had the pleasure of walking around part of Giga, Texas with him at Cyber Rodeo. I've interviewed him once or twice before. A great guy. Tried to get him back on the channel, and he's been busy or unable for whatever reason, and maybe I haven't pushed hard enough. Russian market in Pantai. I don't know what that is. So let's start with this thread. This is the beginning of the thread. He was on Farzad's channel with Hans and mentioned some stats about rideshare demand. This is a heat map of Chicago. The heat map shows where the demand is for rideshare, where people need a ride. And the underlying story is how are you valuing robo taxis? What is the value of one robo taxi? How many robo taxis will there be? How does the robo taxi market change over time? And he picks up some of that in this thread. But napkin math talking about real demand data, and he's talking about this is the demand for robo taxis in Chicago, for rideshare in Chicago, and it's really high. So he's using Chicago as a baseline to gauge rideshare demand available to robotaxis and estimate fleet size, revenue, utilization to inform a model of the robotaxi market at the 1 million vehicle US fleet scale. And he says we need 10,000 vehicles to service up to 6,500 rides at peak usage. So I don't necessarily disagree with that. I'm not sure we need that many. And I'm sure he has his numbers for why. But I think the larger issue is the million. One of my biggest issues with his analysis is a million vehicle U.S. fleet scale. The U.S. fleet is going to be 10 million easy, and we'll dive into that as we go through. So he's got revenue 24 million per week for 10.8 million paid miles. Average miles is $2.25. I think he's using data from Uber or some other rideshare source. Average miles $2.25, but long tail of ride lanes mean the average trip is $4 a mile. And then deadheading adds 5 million unpaid miles per week. So what's deadheading? Let's talk about deadheading first. And this is, by the way, I'm not sure he's wrong. His numbers on deadheading are more optimistic than mine. When you guys have seen me do robotaxi models before, for me, it's like, all right, 50% paid miles, 50% unpaid miles, and maybe you get to 60%. I think I usually use 60% unpaid miles. This is more like 70% paid miles and 30% unpaid, where I'm using 60% paid in my typical model. Deadheading is you're driving let's say you're driving Uber and you start the day and you leave home and you go out to try to position yourself to be in an optimal place. That mile's dead miles because you're not getting paid for it. You get summoned to a ride and you agree to take the ride. The drive to pick up the rider is unpaid miles. Then you drive the rider and you get however many miles you get there. And then the miles between rides are dead miles. You're not getting paid for the miles between rides. You're only getting paid for the miles of the ride. So, my general sense is about, I think most people will say 50-50, 50% unpaid miles, 50% paid miles. I expect the Tesla Robotaxi network to optimize and do better than 50%. But what James is saying here is even with really not that much optimization, we're already at like 70% paid miles. And this is very good when you do a Robotaxi model, getting 70% paid miles is very, very good because you're only rocking it. Only 30% of your miles are unpaid. So you're doing better. What is Mark? Unfortunately, Mark, the way my thing shows up, I can't read the last comment in the chat gets blocked by a heart for some reason. I don't know what YouTube is doing there. So I want to get into where I disagree with James. So the deadheading figure is estimated from industry averages plus trip duration distribution. Most trips are short, stay in city center, have low overhead. Some trips are longer and have higher overhead. Average median trip is 18. The average trip is 18 minutes. The median trip is 14 minutes. Average is like, okay, the average. And the median is half the trips are shorter than that, half the trips are longer than that. Median and average do not line up in general. They're often close, but they generally don't line up. They're generally different numbers. So operating costs, now this is where I'm going to start to disagree with James. He says operating costs from a combination of sources gets us to 28 cents a mile for a $25,000 retail vehicle, or 42 cents per fleet mile, including deadheading costs. So this is where I disagree with James. When you look at a $25,000 vehicle, one of the big questions here is, what are you amortizing it over? So when you'll see total cost of ownership of Tesla, and you'll see people say, oh, the total cost of ownership is 50, 60 cents a mile. And what they're doing is they're looking at 5 years, 60,000 miles. But that's not a robotaxi's life. A robotaxi is doing 100,000. A Tesla-owned robotaxi, a fleet-owned robotaxi, whether it's Tesla fleet or some other fleet, is doing 100,000 miles a year for 10 years. So you're amortizing the cost of the vehicle over 10 years and 1,000,000 miles. You're not amortizing it over 60,000 miles. And that leads to a dramatically lower cost of the vehicle averaged over the life of the vehicle. And then you get into, like he's got here, tires, power, vehicle costs, vehicle life miles. There's other, maintenance. Do you have to replace a battery pack? My expectation is going to be, with lithium iron phosphate batteries in most robotaxis, you're not going to replace the battery pack in 1,000,000 miles. You're going to get 6, 7, 8,000 cycles at, once you get 5,000 cycles at 200 miles of range, you're at 1,000,000 miles. And you're going to have 250 miles of range and 6,000 cycles. You're really going to get 1.5 million miles in the battery pack, unless something else happens besides the chemistry issue. So when I work out these numbers, the big difference is if you're amortizing that $25,000 vehicle over 1,000,000 miles, it's like, is that even 2.5 cents a mile? I think that's 2.5 cents a mile, right? So if you amortize it over 60,000 miles, then it's a much larger number. So do I think deadheading will go up before it goes down like an S-curve? I think that deadheading will be generally about the same. I think that there will be some optimization in the robotaxi network by Tesla as time goes on, and you'll get some improvement. But it's not like I don't think it's going to be big radical changes. I think you're going to see in the ballpark of 60 to 70% paid miles, 30 to 40% unpaid miles, and maybe Tesla with optimization. There's optimizations like, where does the vehicle go at the end of the day? And once you learn where the rides are going to be in the morning, then you position the vehicle close to where the vehicles close to where the rides are going to be the next day. Right? That's the secret of making the robotaxi network more efficient and there's things like optimizing the charging. Like, you don't want the vehicle sitting at the supercharger. So typically what I see happening, and maybe I'm wrong about this, is that ideally the vehicle drives all day from 6 a.m. to midnight, and it squeaks into the charger at 12:01 a.m. with just enough, with like 3% charges up to 95%. With lithium iron phosphate, you charge up to 100%, and it goes and positions itself for the next day. So are they going to be charging them at superchargers? Superchargers are going to degrade life a little bit. It's probably better to charge 19 kilowatt non DC fast chargers, maybe, or some lower rate of charge. So they may have some optimization to how you arrange charging. And then the other thing is, like, what if you decide we're going to charge this vehicle in the middle of the day? Then the network optimizes which vehicle is going to charge when, because you don't want vehicles sitting doing nothing. So there's going to be some sort of optimization around things like that, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. And I think basically you're looking at 60, 70%. I hope James is right and it's really 70%. Maybe we get to 75%. If you get to 75% paid miles versus 25% unpaid miles, the numbers get better for the valuation for robotaxi. So he's got 42 cents per fleet mile, including deadheading costs. And I think we're probably, the way I look at it is, what's the cost per mile of the vehicle over the 100,000 miles a year? And then what's the revenue for the miles that you're going to generate for the miles that you are paid? So if you're at 100,000 miles a year, and you're at what I think is probably going to be more like 15 cents a mile or less for the robotaxi, I think the next generation vehicle, the robotaxi vehicle, is probably going to be more efficient. The Model 3 does about 4.5 miles a kilowatt hour, which is about 7 kilometers a kilowatt hour, by the way. I think the next gen vehicle has a shot at getting close to 6 miles a kilowatt hour. And if it gets to 6 miles a kilowatt hour, that's just lowering the energy cost. Now, if you're going to end up charging everything on your own solar, then maybe you don't care as much about that. But still, you'd like to reduce energy as much as possible, energy consumption as much as possible. So I think maybe we're going to see probably not 6 miles per kilowatt hour, but maybe we can get close to 6 miles per kilowatt hour, and that lowers the cost of energy, right? And then if you do some other things, maybe maintenance and operations and cleaning end up being less expensive, because I think they're looking at all those things. Um, Sorry, I'm just looking. What if you factor in the rider's time waiting for the bus? Not going to beat our bus price. No, we will beat bus prices. I think it depends on where the bus is. Okay. If it's a New York City bus, New York City charges $2.75 flat for bus or subway. So if you're going to go 10 miles, if you go long term on Robotaxi and you follow Kathy Wood's model and she says it's going to get down to 25 cents a mile price, then you're going to be able to go 10 miles in a Robotaxi for $2.50 versus $2.75 for riding the New York subway and bus system. And the Robotaxi is going to take you door to door. It's going to be a lot more convenient than the subway and the buses. So, and most rides are probably less than 10 miles in New York City. So I don't know what just happened. I just got a weird thumbs up there. I don't know how that happened. So yeah, if you think about the rider's time, then there's huge value there. We know when the bus is coming, know the schedule. Oh, Mark, I don't know where you are, but New York City buses are not that reliable. Not every bus system is that reliable. I'm riding the BTS system in Bangkok, and it's not completely predictable when when these trains are gonna show up. Some of them it is, some of them it isn't. They're not necessarily on a fixed schedule, but if it's every 6 minutes, it's every 6 minutes. The nearest city to me has fareless bus, but frequency is 15 to 60 minutes. Yeah, it just varies. So but when you head to a world where the robo taxis are, you're not going to get to 25 cents a mile for a long time, but even at 50 cents a mile, if your typical trip is 5 miles, you're cheaper than the New York City subway and bus system, and their prices tend to rise. So by the time we get there, New York City might be 350. So, um, so I just want to hit. This is one of my big disagreements with James Douma's analysis. I think you're probably looking at 15 cents a mile total cost of the vehicle over the life of the vehicle. So if you're doing 100,000 miles, and let's say you're doing $1 a mile revenue, right? And you get 70,000 paid miles now. If he's correct, so you got 70,000 paid miles, you got $70,000 in revenue, and you got 15 cents a mile cost on 100,000 miles is $15,000. So you got 70,000 minus 15,000, you got $55,000 in gross profit per vehicle. That's a big deal. And this is one of those places where I think my numbers with James are going to be off a little bit. So looking at this from a standpoint, each vehicle is driving he's got vehicles driving 55,000 miles a year. And again, I think he's way off. I think it's common for Uber drivers today to drive 100,000 miles a year. A full-time, and that's driving 8 hours a day. I think the robo-taxis are going to go 16 hours a day. Elon says they're more like maybe 10 hours a day or something like that, but that's still more than an Uber driver is probably driving. So I think you're probably looking at 12 to 16 hours a day. I don't know why you wouldn't do 6 a.m. to midnight, right? Until you've saturated the market and you have more robo-taxis than you need, I think generally speaking, you're probably looking at 6 a.m. to midnight, you're going to be running your robo-taxis. And when you get into the 6 a.m. window or the near midnight window, there's probably less demand. So maybe you're sitting a little longer. And I should say, when I talk about the pricing, and let's say $1 a mile, which that'll be down the road. The early pricing is going to be $2 a mile, $2.50 a mile. I'll talk about pricing in a minute. Maybe I'll talk about it shortly. What I expect to happen is in the early days of Robotaxi, we're going to see prices around $2.50 a mile. And the $2.50 a mile is an average price. All they need to do is undercut Uber. And if Uber's current pricing is around $3 a mile, and I think James had it at $4 a mile, but let's say Uber, I think the general ballpark average for Uber and Lyft is around $3 a mile. So if you average $2.50 a mile, then nobody's going to ride Uber Lyft. They're going to ride Robotaxi. So you're good there. So the thing is, at peak times, you're going to have surge pricing. And the vehicle's going to be, the ride's going to be more priced higher. At non-peak times, you're close to midnight or you're 6 a.m., there's probably less peak time. The price is probably going to be lower. But the average over the course of the day, the course of the vehicle's day, is probably going to be in the ballpark of $2.50 a mile early. And then as you get more robotaxi, if you priced it lower, there would be too much demand and people would wait too long for a ride. If you price it too high, nobody's riding, right? If you price it higher than Uber, people will ride Uber. But once you get significant volume, now you'll gradually bring the prices down to match your supply to their demand. I don't know if Uber makes money. It's a good question. I'm all about the Warren disagrees with Person X videos. Thank you. So James has 55,000 miles a year, generating over $100,000 a year after operating costs. So he's got overhead miles. He's got $2.40 revenue per mile. So I think that is a early stage of robotaxi pricing is around $2.40 a mile. I'm not sure whether he's 240 cents per paid mile or 240 cents per total mile. I don't know how he's worked that out. I don't know if his 55,000 miles is the total miles driven or if the 55,000 miles is. So this is where I feel like his analysis wasn't completely clear. And I didn't watch the video, right? I'm going with his chart. You plan your trip via the bus schedule. Yeah, I don't want to have to think about a bus schedule. I just want to press a button on my phone and a ride shows up. Okay, so James' attitude is that $20,000 cost vehicle with a 10-year life has a present value of $800,000. That's pretty amazing. So he's got $100,000. Now, my numbers, I don't usually go with this like really high revenue of $2.40 a mile. I usually go with $1 a mile because here's the game. Okay, in the early days of the robotaxi network, there is not sufficient supply of robotaxis. You have to keep the prices high. So you're probably looking at $2.50 a mile average revenue. If you get $2.50 a mile average revenue, you're not doing 55,000 miles a year. You're doing 100,000 miles a year, and you've got $250,000 a year in revenue, and your cost is only like $15,000. So you're making over $200,000 a year gross profit on the car. As the robotaxi network grows, as you add more robotaxis to the network, you're bringing the price down. So in the early days, in the first year or two of the robotaxi network, the vehicles are making insane profits. But as it expands, the pricing falls from $2.50 a mile to $2 a mile to $1.50 a mile to $1 a mile. Even at $1 a mile, you're still making insane profits, right? Because you're doing $100,000 a year in revenue. Sorry, you're doing $70,000 a year in revenue, $15,000 a year in cost. You're still doing $55,000 in gross profit. Over 10 years, that's $550,000. So he's got higher numbers, and I think the mistake that James is making here, and I love James, but I want to be clear about this. If I disagree with James, he's probably more right than I am. But I still have to look at it with my eye and think about this and say, okay, in the early days, this is where I think his big mistake is the $2.40 per mile, and then thinking that that's going to continue. The $2.40 per mile will not last. The price of a ride will fall as you grow the robotaxi network. I mean, you hit like 100 million robotaxis in the United States, which is probably more than we need. Then the price is falling down to like 50 cents a mile. I want to be clear, when you cross a threshold of like $1 a mile price for a ride, you start getting significant numbers of people saying, I don't want to own a car anymore. It's less expensive for me. Because the average American spends $1.70 a mile on their car. Some Americans spend more. If you've had 2 DUIs on your record and you've got bad credit, right? Your insurance rates are through the roof, your financing costs are through the roof, and your cost per mile is much higher. So what ends up happening, and this is actually a really good thing, by the way, for road safety, is if the people with two DUIs and bad credit, those are the ones who have more accidents, right? So if you take the people with 2 DUIs and bad credit off the road first, then the human drivers left on the road are the safer human drivers. If the teenagers are paying higher insurance premiums and you take them off the road and they say, you know what, I don't even want to drive a car. I got these robo-taxis. They're early adopters. They're going to hop in robo-taxis. So you remove teenagers and drunk drivers from the road. Well, the roads just got a lot safer, a lot faster. And you probably go from 40,000 deaths a year to less than 20,000 deaths a year in the first few years. Just by, not in the early $2.50 a mile days, but when you get down to close to $1 a mile, pretty quickly that's going to draw a lot of the worst drivers out of driving, and they're going to take robo-taxi life because it saves them money. You know, the 65-year-old who has a 20-year-old Ford Crown Victoria, I'm making up, an old Ford or something like that, who drives 5,000 miles a year, that guy's cost per mile is, because he owns the vehicle outright, his insurance is cheap. That guy's not paying a lot per mile. He's not going to bother riding robo taxis, but he's not the dangerous driver. So why is it that you keep pushing out robotaxi? It's coming this year, Elon said. I haven't said 2030. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not pushing out robotaxi at all. I think robotaxi starts, well, they announced the vehicle. They're going to reveal the vehicle this year. I think the robotaxi network goes live somewhere next year. And I think you start seeing volume robotaxi operations late 2025, sometime in 2026. And by volume, I mean, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of vehicles. The goal by 2030 is to, at some point you start rolling out. Now you've got, because once you have the robotaxi network working, then every vehicle Tesla makes basically should go into the robotaxi fleet with rare exception. And if Tesla's making 5 million vehicles a year at that point, you can see the robotaxi network growing fast. And if in 2030 they're making 20 million vehicles a year, you can see the robotaxi network growing really fast. And I should say, I think it grows fast in the United States first, in Europe. I think it grows in China a bit. Places where human drivers are more expensive, like the United States, are where the robotaxi succeeds first. Now, I'm here in Thailand. I was just in Malaysia. The cost of a ride and a Grab is the equivalent of Uber, is probably closer to, like, if Uber is $3 a mile in Bangkok, Thailand in general, you're less than $1 a mile already. You might be around 70 cents a mile. And then some people ride what's called Grab Bike, which is hop on the back of a motorcycle, and that's like 35 cents a mile. So I'm not making up the numbers. I'm in the ballpark. But I will typically go on like a 15-kilometer ride, and it's like $6. That's like 60 cents a mile. It's crazy. And it was cheaper in Malaysia, and it was cheaper in Vietnam. So the more expensive countries are where robotaxi is going to be successful first. And like Malaysia subsidizes the price of gasoline, so that makes EVs less competitive, right? So, but when you saturate the U.S. market and you drive the price of a ride in the U.S. market down below 70 cents a mile, now it makes sense to start shipping robotaxis to Thailand and Malaysia, whatever, and you start pushing. And I think over the long haul, they're going to find ways of lowering that cost of operation from 15 cents a mile to 10 cents a mile. And if that's effectively a 15-cent cost per mile per paid mile, now you can start selling rides for 20, 25 cents a mile. And you're really, the big goal is, can you undercut the car rides in countries like Thailand and Malaysia and the Philippines and these large countries that have lower incomes? And can you get to the point where undercutting the motorcycles and the scooters? Because that's really, the thing is, that's where you're really starting to just totally expand the robotaxi market to insane levels. And that's where I think the robotaxi kicks in. The podcar robotaxi I'm fantasize that I'm going to be building, hopefully starting in a couple months now, that comes in, and that gets the cost of the mile down to a penny a mile. And now you can sell rides for 5 cents a mile, and now you're making life better for a lot of people, along with making money. How many robotaxis oversaturate the U.S. market? So I believe that the U.S. market has something like 300 million vehicles, about 340 million people. So if each robotaxi serves like 5 people, you probably need 60 million robotaxis in the United States. Throw in Canada, maybe it's 70, 80 million. And then, do people want more rides because rides have become cheap and the robotaxi lifestyle becomes attractive? And then there's, the peak. How many do you need at the peak versus how many did you meet over the entire course of the day? But I'm guessing it's somewhere between 50 and 80 million is when you start to oversaturate the U.S. market. But it's not just the U.S., right? They will be in Canada, they will be in Australia, they will be in Europe, assuming you get approval in these places. And China's probably going to be very favorable to robotaxis. I don't think the price of a ride in China is comparable to the price of a ride in the U.S., but if they're building robotaxi vehicles in China, they might as well run rides there too. And Japan is less expensive than the US, but still, that's an opportunity. Will Tesla give you FSD if you join the robotaxi network? So my theory on this is Tesla's going to want to incentivize, in the early days, Tesla's going to want to incentivize every Tesla owner to put their vehicle on the robotaxi network, whether you paid for FSD or not. I don't think they should try. When I look at it from a business perspective, I don't think they should change the revenue share whether you paid for FSD or not. Whether they feel some sort of need to do that, I don't know, but you want to incentivize everyone to put their vehicle in the network, and I don't think that the revenue share would be different. Matthew says, hot take, I think there's a high likelihood once we are in Robotaxi world that it gets to 80% of trips in 5 years if Tesla can push out. They can't push out that many cars. There's 2 billion cars on Earth. If you talk about the United States, maybe. But yeah, if they did 20, well, if they do 20 million cars a year, they won't all be in the US. There's going to be a third in China and a third in Europe, right? So if they're doing 6 million cars a year, it's going to take close to 10 years to get to 6 million cars in the United States. 60 million to get to 60 million cars to really start to potentially oversaturate the network. So it'll take a while. And there's always the possibility somebody else license FSD, and then that expands the production. Where's the electricity cost included in the model? I think that was the previous slide. James had power PM, but if you think about it this way, if it's call it 15 cents a kilowatt hour, right? So if you're getting 6 miles per kilowatt hour, and it's 15, let's say it's 12 cents a kilowatt hour, right? If it's 12 cents a kilowatt hour and you're getting 6 miles per kilowatt hour, I think that works out to 2 cents a mile. Simple math, right? I think I've got that right. Something like that. And maybe it's 15 cents, so it's 2.5 cents a mile, something like that. So electricity is not necessarily that big of a chunk. It's amortizing the vehicle, it's electricity. It's weird, like tires end up being, if your tires last 20,000 miles versus 100,000 miles, it's a huge, huge difference. So I think the Robotaxi is going to have very high tread wear life tires that sacrifice some performance. Because if you can get 100,000 miles out of your tires, and let's say they cost $200 a set, well, then $200 over 100,000 miles is pretty cheap, right? If it's $2,000, if it's because 100,000 miles, $200, you're like, I think that's less. That's like 0.2 cents a mile, right? But if you're 20,000 miles, $200 a set of tires, and that's a penny a mile, right? So you're looking at all these ways, and I don't think insurance. I think James had insurance. I don't think insurance is relevant. Tesla's self-insuring, and if the cars don't crash, then if you dramatically reduce the likelihood of crash, if it's a Tesla-owned vehicle, then Tesla's going to handle everything themselves, and their cost of insurance, it's not really insurance anymore. It's just the cost of doing business. What do we got to do with that? So, and you're going to get hit by an uninsured driver, and then you got to deal with that. So there's some cost in there somewhere, but I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal. Okay. So anyway, James comes up with this huge number of a net present value of 840. He's got $108,000 yearly profit. And I want to stress this. My numbers are not this high in the long term. So my model is basically this. When you're at 10 million vehicle fleet, call it $1 a mile, right? And $1 a mile times a million vehicles. Sorry, $1 a mile. You work out to around, call it $60,000 a year in gross profit. I think it was call it $50,000 a year in gross profit, because it just gives you simple numbers. And you got 10 million vehicles, you got $500 billion a year in gross profit for the company, for Tesla. And then when the fleet expands to 100 million vehicles, which is not just the US, right? It's the US and Europe and so on, then you're probably making $20,000 a vehicle a year, and you got $2 trillion in gross profit. That's the US, Europe, Canada, Australia, China, whatever. So you're really starting to get crazy numbers. So, but I think his $108,000, I don't see that extending for 10 years. I don't think it's viable. I think that's like the first few years of the Robotaxi network, you could be making outsized gross profits. But I think you're doing 100,000 miles a year, and in the early days, you're making even more money, but in the later years, you're making a lot less money just because the price falls. Mark says, with solar, wind, battery, electric, cost of electric power will be near zero or less. It would be, but you have to amortize the cost of the panels. You have to amortize the cost of the grid that you have to set up. You have to amortize the batteries. It's not zero. It's just a lot less. Summer Breeze says, how many operational Robotaxi by 2035? Any guess? Well, if you're doing 20 million vehicles a year in 2030, which is a stretch, but let's suppose you're doing 20 million vehicles a year. It looks like we're pushing that to 2032, but let's just say it's 20 million vehicles a year by 2030. Then 5 years of that is 100 million vehicles. And that doesn't include other companies, like I think BYD might license FSD. BYD is going to make a high volume electric vehicles, so that would make sense. Um, 1.21 giga robotaxis. I like it. 1.21 gigawatts. Uh, Robotaxi parcel deliveries. I do think that's very likely. I think we're going to see a cargo version of Robotaxi with an Optimus in it to, walk the package up to the front door. I think that would make a lot of sense. So this is two of James' posts. Okay, so the first one, during off-peak, outside of Friday and Saturday evenings, idle vehicles are pre-positioned to allow for reliable 30 to 60-second response times. Yeah, I think this is optimistic to say you're going to get 30 to 60-second response times. Um, I guess what he's saying is off peak. This is that thing where the network optimizes it, figures out where are people likely to demand rides, and then you position your robo taxis to be near where rides are likely to be requested. But I don't think it's going to be that perfect, and I think he's overly optimistic about getting. This is when you have scale. You need to have a really, really high volume of vehicles to be able to get to this point where your response times are that low. And if you have that many vehicles, then your price per ride has to be lower because now your supply, if you're getting to people in 30 to 60 seconds, it means your supply is out there to match demand. Um, and James says the level of service can be provided in Chicago at current rideshare rates, generating $1.25 billion in revenue and $1 billion gross profit a year using Tesla's FSD rideshare model. But Chicago is only 1% of the U.S. urban population. So I think what he's basically saying is you're looking at $100 billion gross profit per year. And I think he's short. I think it's 500 billion in gross profit per year. But I'm at 10 million. I'm fuzzy on where he's getting his numbers. Um, yeah, I lost the chart there. So extracting to the whole U.S., you get a million vehicle fleet generating $100 billion gross profit per year. And I think you're at a 10 million vehicle fleet and you're at $500 billion gross profit per year, just to be clear about where the disagreement is. Naturally, there will be competition, regulatory barriers fight with incumbents, and pushback from various quarters, so actual results will vary. But the potential for the underlying business is extraordinary. Looking even further ahead, a cost floor of 40 cents a mile allows for expansion beyond current rideshare demand, potentially commoditizing half or more of all vehicle miles in the United States. So again, I think he's pessimistic. I think the cost floor, you're probably looking at 15 cents a mile, maybe 10. I think the robotaxi will be optimized. You may get a next generation robotaxi that's a little smaller, a little more efficient, lower cost. And, maybe it's not a $25,000 vehicle. Maybe it's a $20,000 vehicle. Maybe you get 200,000-mile tires. I don't know how maybe you're getting 7 miles per kilowatt hour. If you optimize a lot of different ways, I think you're looking at cost closer to 15 cents a mile instead of, I don't know where he's getting this 40 cents a mile. I think if you're amortizing that vehicle over 100, and are we talking about a Tesla-owned vehicle? Or are we talking about a privately owned vehicle that's put in the robotaxi network? Why talking about gross profit, not net profit? So, because we're just because it's easy to work with gross profit, it's hard to predict net profit because you don't know what the tax rates are going to be and what the other issues are going to be. But we can compare current gross profit to this predicted gross profit to current gross profit. Current gross profit's around $20 billion, let's say in 2023. So if you go to $500 billion in gross profit, you've 25x gross profit. James is only getting $100 billion in gross profit, which is 5x, which still doesn't suck, but that's not the same thing. Mark says you have to plan renewable energy. Oh, Phil says, let me go to Phil first. Phil says 50% of US vehicle miles. Yeah, well, what happens is the robo taxis are driving 5 times as many miles as the regular cars. James has only got them doing 55,000 miles a year. I've got them doing 100,000 miles a year. So if you pump out a bunch of vehicles and they're doing 100,000 miles a year and they're replacing privately owned vehicles, like when you get to the point where, again, his pricing doesn't work with this. When you get to the point where people who own vehicles decide I don't want to own a car anymore, I'm just going to ride robo taxis because the robo taxi life's easier and cheaper, then you start to get to where like large swaths of the population stop owning cars. That's where that comes from. And I think you're really looking at 80 to 90% of US vehicle miles, and global vehicle miles will end up being robo taxi. Mark says you have to plan renewable energy for the highest demand, lowest production. On high production days, there'll be a surplus of energy and near zero cost or less. Pay you for power. Yeah, I think we're probably hoping to see overproduction of I think we're probably hoping to see overproduction of energy to be safe. The Wiz says, I'm looking for robotaxis to reduce, eliminate parking lot requirements. Actually, I think James addresses parking in a minute. So we'll talk about parking in a minute. Tony Siva predicts 80% of cars off the road. So on the one hand, you reduce the number of cars on the road because the same car is doing 5 times as much work. But if you lower the price of rides enough, then people travel more. And you might end up doubling the amount of time of trips people are taking. If you double the number of trips people are taking, you still need the cars to take people. So Phil says work trucks will be hard to remove. I think work trucks are not hard to remove. I think you're thinking, you got to think bigger. I think instead of having a work truck, you'll have a work trailer, and a cyber truck will tow you from one job site to the other. And the cyber truck will go and tow somebody else next, and you'll sit on your job site with your battery pack enabled, trailer, and you'll be able to get work done on the job site with your trailer. You won't bother owning a whole vehicle. It wouldn't be efficient to have your truck sitting there all day doing nothing. Let's say you're going to one job site a day or two job sites a day. It doesn't make sense for your vehicle, for the motorized portion of the vehicle, to sit for so many hours when it can drop off your trailer, go pick up another trailer, do another run. That's going to be a more efficient system. Now, how long does it take to get to a system like that? It takes a while, because now you have to get all these guys who have work trucks to ditch their work trucks and buy the trailer. But the trailer ends up being a lot more convenient than the truck. It holds more, costs less. So that model is going to make sense. It's just, how long does it take to transition to that? And it won't be immediate. So cost floor 40 cents a mile allows for expansion beyond current rideshare demand, potentially commoditizing half or more of all vehicle miles. 50% of U.S. vehicle miles with 60 cents revenue, 40 cents cost per mile, is $250 billion of profit on, and $750 billion of revenue. That's a very big industry, and that's only the U.S. Right. So I still think he's underselling, right? Because I think the 60 cents revenue is probably about right, but the 40 cents cost per mile is probably high. Maybe 20 cents cost per mile. So you're really looking at $500 billion of profit. And I think not only that, but you probably increase the number of miles that are traveled, because you've lowered the cost so much that it becomes more efficient to travel, and more people travel more. So I think there's even more gain there. So he's optimistic. I'm not, James is not pessimistic here. I just think he's not optimistic enough. And it's sort of like, when does it happen? When do you see this transition? When do these things take place? My guess is, if we're going to see this robotaxi in production late 2025, then there's going to be a new generation of robotaxi 2 or 3 years later, so 2028. That's even more efficient and even lower cost. Tesla's not going to stop innovating. DeWiz says, I don't think cars on roll reduced in parking lots, yes, except for people driving looking for a place to park. No, parking lots, now I'm not a huge fan of the Now You Know guys anymore, but they did a video a while back on what's going to happen to parking lots. The robo-taxis don't need to park near the place that they're going. They can wait in a less crowded spot and swoop in. They're going to be driving so much that, like, if they're operating, let's say 16 hours a day, then they're not parking, right? They're only parking at night. So you're actually having a lot less parking. So the parking, I think you end up like removing like 80% of parking lots. All these parking structures become useless and demolished and replaced with green space or useful buildings. Phil says, let's not forget people traveling less as time goes on. I think people travel more. I think people are going to travel more. As the price of travel gets cheaper, people will travel more. I'm here in Asia, and like flying to Malaysia was cheap. If you're in Malaysia, the price of gas is cheap. Taking a ride on a Grab, it's like so much cheaper than taking a ride on an Uber in America. So I travel a lot more because the price is lower. If you lower the price of travel, then I'm going to travel more. Just 1 million vehicles resulting in 100 billion gross profit. That's insane. Yes, it is. And I think James is wrong. I think I disagree with his numbers. I think it's 10 million vehicles and $500 billion gross profits. So you decide which one's more insane. All right, so let's keep going. Now, James responded to a few people in his thread. So Patrick said, I want to write an argument that assuming current rideshare prices were wrong, but it's actually a reasonable assumption. People value consistent, dependable results highly. A robotaxi might outcompete humans even at the same price. James says actual pricing will depend on multiple hard-to-predict factors and will decline over time as supply increases. We agree on that. That's why I think his numbers are wrong if you're looking over a 10-year stretch. The Chicago thought experiment provides a reference for one demand pricing service level and should be relevant up to approximately 1 million vehicles. I think he's correct that at a million vehicles, the price point doesn't change. I just think the million vehicles happens fast. I mean, really, the minute you open up the Robotaxi network, you've got 5 million Teslas on the road. Actually, by the time the Robotaxi network opens, you've probably got 2, 3, 4 million Robotaxi capable Teslas in America already. And Tesla's pumping out 2 million plus a year. So that 1 million vehicle window is going to be really short. You're going to be at 10 million vehicles before, I think, around 2030, if not before. And so, worrying about the million vehicle time period is really short. And again, just be clear, I've talked to James a lot. I've watched James a lot. I think he's smarter than me. If James thinks something and I'm disagreeing with him, there's a fair chance he's right and I'm wrong. Just want to stress that. Which begs the question: why is Tesla building multi-level parking garage in Giga Texas? Because right now they need people to show up to work, and the Robotaxi network is not going to replace everybody within the next 3 to 5 years. So they need places for people to park to come do the work at the factory. Brian Kex has been watching Now You Know a lot less too. I don't know why their content just gets redundant. Can't put my finger on it. So there's a challenge. I'm just going to go off on a side note here. As a YouTuber, as a content creator, there's this challenge of like, what content am I going to create? And like, people have said, Warren, are you going to update your model for Tesla share price? I'm like, well, it hasn't really changed. So should I just make a video saying Robotaxi is going to generate $500 billion in gross profit once a year, twice a year? Should I make the same video over and over again? I think that gets old. And I think what happens is you get caught up in a trap where you have something that works with the audience, and the audience loves the video that you're making. So you keep making basically the same video over and over again, and the audience loves it, and they're enjoying the video. But for me, I would lose my passion. So I make videos I want to make when I want to make them, and when the inspiration strikes me. And this one, I saw this thread, and I've been wanting to talk to James on a Zoom, do a video like this, but that hasn't happened. So here's my chance to argue with James without arguing with James, and friendly argument, not an angry argument. And the other point I wanted to make, I think you're going to see a big transition on YouTube and other video content platforms within 3 years. The transition, and I'm adapting to, I'm planning for this already. The transition you're going to see is edited videos are going to start to disappear. Sorry, artificial intelligence generated edited videos are going to be better than human generated edited videos. I think Farzad already did an experiment, and the video he made using AI, AI emulating his voice, AI writing the script, did better than his typical video, right? So we're not very far away from AI making the vast majority of video content like that, and schmucks like me aren't going to be able to compete with that, right? And I'm not going to try. Now I could get an AI to mimic my voice and get an AI to start writing scripts and run B-roll and do videos. That's not what motivates me. What motivates me is talking about what I'm passionate about at the moment, getting feedback like this from you guys in the chat, and having a conversation. And this conversation that I'm having with the chat, this live stream, is something that's going to take AI longer to beat out. So I think doing these live streams is a much better path long term for me and for content creators to do this kind of live stream approach rather than trying to compete with AIs on edited videos. Do I think at the Tesla dinner we'll have Tesla bot servers? How about cooks? I'm not too worried about that. How many crashes until they're forced to turn it off? Crashes of what? I'm not sure what you're talking about. I think that when the Robotaxi network goes live, they're not going to crash. There's going to be crashes, but you're going to have to determine fault. And are you going to decide that the Robotaxi is at fault when it's not at fault? Matthew says Robotaxi built in Austin will start there, and over time they'll just drift further out naturally, which reduces shipment costs. I think the cost of shipping a Robotaxi to, say, California from Texas or to Florida is really small, and that's not material. You ship the Robotaxis to the place where the Robotaxi network is most viable first, and keep going. Do I think 8.8 is after Elon's new pay plan? No. I don't know when Elon's new pay plan will be. I don't think it'll be that soon. I think they may wait for the case to resolve. Do I think 10 million robotaxis by 2040 is a reasonable assumption? I think 10 million robotaxis around 2030 is a reasonable assumption. I think 2040, you're looking at more than 100 million robotaxis and possibly hundreds of millions of robotaxis operating globally. I think 2040, the vast majority of the world has some form of robotaxi operating. There are almost no human drivers. The number of deaths, road deaths per year, has gone from over a million a year to under 50,000 a year. I think we're looking at a really, really bright future as long as we can get government out of the way. So, yeah, so I already addressed this point from James. And then Kylito said, I was envisioning all the streets with street parking opening up from 2 lanes to 4. Then he thought about logistics. How are you thinking about traffic and parking all these robo-taxis? Some will travel to where parking is available, but also consider this. The robo-taxis park 5 times more densely than humans. There's no gap for door entry or exit needed. It can do valet style without an open exit lane for every car because the cars are mostly interchangeable. If you need a particular vehicle from the middle of the packed lot, the cars in the way can just move themselves to let it out. That saves 80% of parking space. So number one, my take is the vehicles are not parking, right? They're driving 16 hours a day, so they're only parking at night. And the parking lots are not crowded at night. So there's really no parking problem at all. And they can park, they can do street parking. They can park wherever is convenient for the system to make it work. And some of them will be in the supercharger, some of them will be near the supercharger, some of them will be positioning for the next day's rides. I don't think that's really an issue. So, okay. So that's what I wanted to cover. And I think that this is I want let me just go back and sort of restate. James has a model where you got a million robo taxis generating $100 billion a year in gross profit, and I think he's probably off in a few different ways, but he's in the ballpark. Okay, and I think his estimates of cost per vehicle mile are high. I think his estimate of the miles driven by a robo taxi a year are low. I be shocked if the average robotaxi didn't do more than 100,000 miles a year. And he's got like 55,000 miles a year. So I think that's way off. Um, and he's got an average price of the ride at like $2.40 a mile, which is true in the early days of robotaxi. But I think you're going to see a quick decline to $1 a mile. As you start approaching $1 a mile, the demand starts surging. So it takes a while to get below $1 a mile. It takes a while to get to 70 cents a mile. When you get to 70 cents a mile, there's like really, really high volume of people deciding I don't want to bother running a car anymore, and the demand just goes off the charts. And when you get below 70 cents a mile, it's just like everybody, almost everybody decides I don't want to own a car anymore. Rich people own cars just like rich people own horses. So my take is I look at a world of 10 million robo taxis doing 100,000 miles a year, charging $1 a mile, making around $50,000 a year in gross profit. That's $500 billion a year in gross profit. That's the Tesla owned robo taxi fleet. Mark Potashnik says SpaceX did another. I think you're more dedicated to SpaceX than I am, Mark. I see all the posts on X, but I actually stopped watching. It's like really sad. I watch sometimes, but I don't watch as much as I used to. So, I see 10 million robotaxi fleet generating $500 billion a year in gross profit, which is 25x Tesla's profit last year. And then I see going out a little further, a few years later, 100 million robotaxi fleet generating $20,000 a car in gross profit, which is $2 trillion a year in gross profit, which is you just start getting insane. And then 2 trillion a year in gross profit is probably like 1.5 trillion a year in net profit, or 1.2 trillion a year in net profit. And you're just like, you're starting to look at, market caps in the 50 trillion range. And then that's not even addressing Optimus, right? Which Optimus might be significantly bigger than Robotaxi in terms of value. So, I do think you get to the point where, like, my fantasy is this pod car robo taxi that's able to deliver rides. It's not just about money, right? It's like, can we transition the world to sustainable energy? And it's not just getting fat Americans out of their Toyota Camrys or their, Highlanders or whatever. Or pickup trucks. It's also about getting that 25-year-old in Thailand who's hopping on the back of a motorcycle to get somewhere. A grab bike, or people riding around in scooters, and can we transition those people to EV robo taxis? And maybe it's my pod car, or maybe it's just electric scooters, but I really think you want to get to the point where humans aren't driving anymore. And so that you're saving lives, so that you're making life more convenient, so that the 25-year-old I'm talking about makes something like $700 a month in pay, right? And they spend $100 a month on a shitty apartment with no air conditioning in Bangkok, which is insane, but they do it. And then they spend maybe $100 a month on transportation to and from work. And can we save them $50 a month on their transportation cost? And can we make their transportation more convenient? They're commuting an hour each way because they got to take this thing to get to the train, take the train there, whatever. Can we get them door to door transportation for a lower cost and, save them, 50% of the money and save them, 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day? Can we make life better for, billions of people? Right? It's not just about making money for Tesla shareholders. As a Tesla shareholder, I like the idea of Tesla shareholders making money, but it's also making the world a better place. It's accelerating the transition to sustainable energy. It's reducing traffic deaths. It's taking, we don't tend to think about that person who's making $700 a month, living in a shitty $100 a month. I think my friend is paying $80 a month. I have a friend who's not poor, but he's doing the Thai lifestyle, so he's paying like $80 a month for an apartment with no air conditioning, right? Um, which is batshit crazy to me, but it's very common for people in Thailand to not have air conditioning, even though it's like 100 degrees out, right? So can we save them 20, 30 minutes a day on their commute? Can we save them $50 a month? They were spending $100 a month on commuting. Can we save them $50 a month on their commuting expenses and make life better for them and make them safer so they're less likely to die in a motorcycle accident, right? Because they're in a safe robotaxi that's going to, be more, not to say that the robotaxi is safer than like a Tesla Model X, but is it safer than a motorcycle? Yeah, it's going to be safer than a motorcycle in a variety. It'll be more crash worthy because motorcycles are not crash worthy at all, and it'll be less likely to crash. So those are some advantages. um, I think 10 million robotaxis before 2030 is a little bit of a stretch, but it's possible. The problem is that Tesla, makes vehicles in the U.S. and China and Europe, and the European produced vehicles probably are not going to be operating as robotaxis as quickly because Europe is going to resist robotaxi longer than in other places. China is probably going to adopt robotaxi quickly. The price per ride in China is probably going to be lower. So how much are it's going to be produced in the United States, and how many robotaxis can we get to 10 million robotaxis by 2030? I think we can. I just don't think it's as obvious. Kathy K, hi Kathy. Morning Warren, just got back from my morning door dashing while testing FSD 12.3.3. You drive DoorDash, Kathy? This is Kathy in California, right? Everyone can picture this in populated areas. How does it work in rural areas where it's not cost effective? Well, I think you're making a bad assumption in saying it's not cost effective. If the cost per mile is 15 cents a mile and the cost for a human driven car is 70 cents a mile, then it's going to be cost effective everywhere. It's just, now it may be that you're going to focus on places with more demand early, but we have Ubers driving in suburban areas now. And if your cost is lower and the decision is, we'll make less money on the vehicles operating in the rural areas, but we'll still operate them because we're making some money on them. As the robotaxi network gets saturated, you're going to send them farther and farther out. When can robotaxi replace my mailman? Is is your mailman having sex with your wife? Because I don't know if you want robotaxi having sex with your wife. Just post your target price on a banner. That should be my video content. Every week I make a video saying, here's my target price for 2030. Uh, Good morning, Mark Plot. Good morning, Mark Potachnik. And just real quick, I want to thank the moderators, Mark and Mark, and often Jim Whitehead moderate the chat. And if every once in a while a troll comes in and starts trolling the chat, I think we've been pretty lucky that that doesn't happen as much anymore. But they do a really good job of taking care of that when it does happen. So, all right, I think I've been going for close to an hour, and I think I've covered the major points. I will just really briefly touch on, if you missed it before, Tesla. Elon announced that Tesla will do a reveal on August 8th of the Robotaxi. He wasn't really specific. DoorDashing to have an excuse for the Tesla. I don't think you need to DoorDash. I'm surprised at that. I think Omar does Uber. Omar does not need to Uber. He does Uber because he likes doing it. Um, So yeah, I don't know where Jim is. So 8-8, and Elon said, I think Sawyer Merritt commented on it being 8 being a lucky number in China, and Elon saying it's also Year of the Dragon. So does that suggest that we're going to see part of the presentation in China? Is the presentation going to address the China? Because of what we were told in the biography was that the Robotaxi would be produced first in Texas, and I think there was some talk that it would be Texas, and I think the Tesla team said this in an earnings call maybe. Then they would produce it in Texas first, and then they would produce it in Mexico next, and then they would find other markets, and that never made sense to me. They're very likely to do China early. Maybe Europe will be a holdup because Europe is, ossified, but don't like, people. Uh huh. So I think that see what it's a really open question. What exactly are we going to see on August 8th? Are we going to see just the vehicle? My gut is they show us the vehicle and they show us more about the factory. My view is that when Tesla does an event like this, it's for recruiting. What's going on with Elon Starlink FCF? Stories about how he lied about FCF. I don't even know what FCF is. What the hell is FCF? Starlink FCF. What is FCF? That's just weird. If somebody can tell me what Starlink FCF is, I can address that, but I have no idea what that is. The Mailman starring Jason Statham. The Mailman starring Harry Reams. I got a dirty mind. Rural areas are going to be more expensive with a lot more deadheading. On the other hand, we may be able to cut. No, rural areas might not have more deadheading because although there will be more miles driven empty, there will also the average drive will be longer. So it's not clear that there will be more deadheading. It's an optimization thing with the Robotaxi network. It might not be that bad, but in any event, the value will be there. Will Tesla announce a car on August 8th, or will they announce a taxi software pricing plan? This doesn't seem like a car announcement. No, I think they're gonna reveal something about the car. I think they're gonna reveal the factory. Who cares about Starlink free cash flow? I don't understand. Like, we're talking about Tesla. 472 Water, I don't know why you're talking about Starlink FCF. I don't know who he would have lied to or who would care. Starlink is clearly making money. It's clearly growing. Everything is going well. So let's stop talking about Starlink because this is a video about Tesla. And somebody can send me a link, email me a link to whatever the story is about Starlink. That maybe I missed it. I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't know enough to talk about that yet. So um, I think they're going to talk about the vehicle. Will they talk about the human driven version as well as the self driving version? We don't know. I think they're going to talk about the factory. My theory is that Tesla does these events as a recruiting thing to pitch to engineers, because a lot of engineers watch these events and say, "Hey, we want you to come help us make the future good." Right? We want to increase the probability the future is good. We want to, accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. This is what we're doing to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. We need great engineers like you to come work for us at Tesla. And so I think then you're going to show little bits of the manufacturing process. You're going to show little bits about the vehicle. Here's the really cool, innovative stuff we're doing. I don't think you're going to see like here's how the software is going to work for the Robotaxi network. I could see Elon doing a new presentation because if you go back to Autonomy Day, Elon presented the basic model, the basic business model for Robotaxi. So I think that he could represent that and maybe update that, but I don't know that he's going to do it. Um, Yeah, I had Starlink for a little while. I thought it was awesome. I only used it as a hobby thing for fun. That wasn't like increase the USA population. I'm working on that. I'm working on the Thai population. So, all right, I can't think of anything else going on with Tesla that deserves to be talked about at the moment. I don't see anybody asking me questions about Tesla that deserve to be talked about. I think we're going to have the earnings call in about 10 days. I don't know what the exact date is for the earnings call, but it's around 10 days from now. And earnings are probably going to suck and people are gonna whine, and the Gerber Black, Barry Glacks, and Lost Gerbils and James Katz will whine about earnings per share. But the really cool thing, I should mention one more thing. We've got FSD version 12 has been out, it's been getting updates, and it appears that they're updating the software like more than once a week. And that's insane because it used to be we would wait a month or 2 months for an update. I was an early FSD beta driver or had an early FSD beta car. You would wait a long time for updates. Now the updates are happening faster and they're bigger gains. And that's something I predicted a while back. It is 11 p.m. here, yeah. Can you talk about why Elon hasn't sued Gordon Johnson for lying? I thought they were going to sue Dan O'Dowd, and they didn't. I don't know. I think there's a, is it worth filing the lawsuit? Is it worth creating the headline? Are we going to gain that much from doing this versus the cost and the time and the hassle? Um, yeah. So, um, I think that that presentation will be driving let's recruit some more employees, but I don't think the software's there. Tesla just went green on the day. Oh, because of me? Okay, thank you. I'm very happy I'm helpful. Did we talk about when FSD rolls out to Cybertruck? No, I believe that version 12 just rolled out to new Model 3, or version 12.3.4 rolled out to new Model 3. I think those rollouts are not that important. They will happen. And the big thing is we're not compute constrained. Elon said that Tesla now has the number 2 amount of compute in the world after Facebook. So you've got like massive compute. You've got the FSD beta miles, right? FSD unsupervised miles now accelerating. So you got lots of data. You got lots of compute. You're going to see lots of improvement fast. And so FSD is going to improve fast. And that's the kind of thing that Wall Street doesn't get. Most of Wall Street doesn't get. Wall Street isn't monolithic. There's different people on Wall Street, but the Barry Glacks of the world don't get it. What's the women like out there? Oh, my girlfriend's over there. But yeah, I will. So I'm just going to address the women in Thailand question. There's this story that's being told that passport bros are going to Thailand and Philippines and finding bevies of beautiful women. And it is true that if you want to spend a lot of not that much money, but a fair amount of money, you can get prostitutes in Thailand cheap, right? And I think there are women who will young women who will date older men in Philippines is pretty common. I honestly talked to a lot of men in foreign men in Thailand who don't find it that easy to find a good woman. It's like if you're looking to find a good woman, it's probably better than the US, but it's not as good as you might think. Same thing with the Philippines. There's lots of women. Are they good women? Are they women that are going to be a good fit for you? So that's a challenge. And I think it's still a challenge. It's not just like you show up to Thailand and women are throwing their panties at you. It's not that simple. And the ones who are throwing their panties at you are the ones you don't want. So taking your time to find a good woman, I feel I'm very lucky that I found my girlfriend fairly quickly. A lot of my friends are telling me I'm really lucky that I found someone who's a real gem, and I'm really happy about it. But I think people are overstating the passport bro case. If you're looking to have sex with prostitutes or what they're called bar girls or freelancers in Thailand, if you're looking to have sex with bar girls, it's probably cheaper than America, and it's probably safer than America too. Um, but that's not really a good life plan if you ask me. Sandy had to learn how to drive Cybertruck. FSD neural net will have to do the same. Yeah, there'll be some learning curve, but they'll solve that pretty quickly. I'm not too worried about that. So, but I will say, like, what's the one? So the one thing is that in Asia generally, there's a lot less obesity. Japan in particular, it's like stunning how thin people are. In Thailand, there's a lot of thin women. There are some overweight women and overweight men as well. It's a little surprising. India was shocking to me how many overweight people there were in India because it's such a poor country. But they fire ping pong balls at you. That's like one place. I haven't even been there. I don't even know where that is exactly. I've heard of it, but I haven't been there. That's not like why I'm here. So, all right. So I'm gonna wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you to Mark and Mark for supervising the chat and for consistently supporting me here. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you, Kathy, for consistent support. And everybody else, really appreciate you guys. And let me know what you think in the comments. T-shirts at elonbits.com. Please support me as a YouTube channel member, as a subscriber on the X platform. Please follow me on X, WFR4NYGov. Daily Lie. I haven't been doing a lot on the Daily Lie, but I'm hoping to get back to doing the Daily Lie soon.